Okay, class and everybody watching or listening, welcome back. This is another Friends of the Class visit that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. I'm joined by Ken Skidmore, also known as Ken the VoiceOver Guy, and we'll get into like where I heard about him and kind of how we have interacted so far in a little bit, but he's done a lot of voiceover work throughout his career, but more recently, and where I heard about him was on the Solo Show and also the Grand Circle Tour podcast. And so reaching out to him, he has a very unique perspective on a lot of things Disney related and career related. So I wanted to talk with him and have a conversation with him about some of those just very, very interesting life experiences. So, Ken, welcome to the show. Welcome to the class. Thank you for joining us. And to start off, could you give us like your introduction to your Disney fandom, how you were introduced, like some of your early memories, and then bring us up to today regarding your fandom?
Certainly. Thank you for having me, Cody. It's a real pleasure, and I hope I can say something interesting at some point here. My I think my Disney fandom started the way I think the way a lot of people's did. I grew up watching the Disney movies, the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Dumbo, and so on. I saw some of them in the theater, not on their original release. I'm not quite that old, but um, a lot of them on VHS and that sort of thing. And for those of you listening that don't know what a VHS is, do some homework. Okay, do your homework. Um, and then later on, as I got a little bit older, I sort of found out rather indirectly of what a voiceover artist actually does. When you're a kid, you just watch the cartoon and you don't
Mhm.
really pay any attention to it. It's just a great cartoon. And then I realized later that there are people who do this work in the background, who do so much work. And that's how I became a fan of voiceover work as well. So I can honestly say that a good portion of my career has come from my love of Disney and animation in total. And as far as being a fan of Disney, I think I can't honestly remember a time when I wasn't a fan of Disney.
And what thanks for that. And what's so like fascinating is when I talk to people about this, and this is the general way usually start a friends of the class visit, is asking about how people were introduced to Disney, and it's always very similar in that it was the movies. For some people it was taking trips to the parks with their family, or their family were already fans, so they were introduced to it that way, which is primarily how people are introduced to most things in their life, through family and close friends or loved ones. But it also, to me, shows just the reach of the Disney brand, that
Mhm.
it was just kind of synonymous with popular culture, even for people like myself and yourself growing up. It was everywhere, and that was long before all of the acquisitions that now basically you can't you can't go an hour walking around or driving in your car without being exposed to Disney in some way now. But even back
Absolutely
then,
not.
like it was such a prominent brand. So what were some of your earliest memories, or earliest like favorite movies and shows and things that really got you into the Disney brand?
There were so many things, and the wonderful thing about Disney is that they've really touched on a lot of very diverse topics over the
Mhm.
years. I mean, if you look at the short cartoons, for example, the Donald Duck and Chip and Dale cartoons, they're just strictly for fun. They're strictly hilarious, and certainly the early ones with Mickey Mouse and Goofy and Donald, that's a lot of the stuff that I saw when I was extremely young. We watched it on television on the Wonderful World of Disney, Wonderful World of Color, that sort of thing. And that was, I would say, probably my real introduction to it. And then I think my parents realized that, okay, he enjoys this. Let's take him to the movies. And the very first one that I ever saw in the theaters was when they did a re-release of Fantasia.
Ah, yeah.
And Fantasia is my personal favorite of the Disney movies. I love them all. I haven't honestly seen one yet that I didn't enjoy. But Fantasia for me was just, I hate to use the cliche of life altering, but it really was, because seeing this amazing concert, which is what
Mm-hmm.
Fantasia really is, opened my eyes to not only to animation and the incredible beauty that there is in animation. It also opened my eyes to this music,
Mm-hmm.
this classical music that I had never heard before, and that's really what got me started, my love of music as well. And you're right about the fact that the Disney brand has always been pretty much ubiquitous. I mean, it is everywhere you look. And even back before, way before the internet, and way before all of that, when literally there was three channels on television, and that's how far back I go. Um, Disney was the product that you saw in merchandising. There were always Mickey Mouse T-shirts
Mm-hmm.
and Donald Duck hats and that sort of thing, and you could always buy the little plastic figurines. Even in your McDonald's Happy Meal for a while there, you'd see like the little plastic figurines. And I don't want to say that it has inundated the culture, but I mean, I think that the Disney experience has been such a part of everyday life now that maybe to a certain degree we kind of take it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And now that it has really exploded on the scene, like you say, with the advent of Disney Plus and the internet, and people that you might never have had an opportunity to talk to about the Disney experience have really kind of made everybody come together, and it's kind of brought a whole new family feeling to the
Yeah.
Disney culture.
Yeah. Well, and on that point, I think it's interesting and important to point out. I am in this meeting or visit from outside of Memphis, Tennessee.
Hmm.
Ken is in Canada having this conversation. Where specifically?
I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba,
Yeah.
actually.
And so they and so you mentioned this, like people you would have never met having conversations about this. I think this is a perfect example right here, because of
Hmm.
our shared interest in this brand. Like now we were able to communicate, contact, and now have this conversation. Um,
Absolutely.
and you mentioned Fantasia, and real quick before I move on, um, do you know that Fantasia was the original plan for Fantasia was that it was going to be um almost like a Broadway show that, like how Broadway shows can be somewhere for multiple years. That was going to be the plan for Fantasia.
Hmm.
And they would periodically switch out different concert pieces. So
Right.
it might have, so if you returned 4 or 5 times, you might see, one or two pieces that were the same, but then there would be something new every time that you went also, and they could just rotate. Um, and what I thought was so cool, and such just like a future looking view of people going to the movie theaters. And then
Hmm.
obviously, there's also the stories of why it wasn't a commercial success originally, was because the company and Walt Disney, the person, wanted, a very specialized um, uh, speaker system installed in the theaters that a lot of smaller theaters couldn't afford.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's one of the more interesting things to me about Fantasia, is that was like really looking into the future about what this consumption could be of this piece.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, wasn't there a point where Walt Disney was actually thinking that this would be something that they would revisit almost on a yearly basis, where
Mm-hmm.
they would record new segments, like you say, and put it in? If I'm not mistaken, and again, feel free to contradict me if I'm wrong. There's a sequence in Fantasia 2000,
Mm-hmm.
the sequence where they do the Gershwin,
Mm-hmm.
which was originally planned to be in the original, but they had to cut it for time, and it was going to be one of the ones that they subbed in later, because at the time that Fantasia was released, the Rhapsody in Blue was a very new composition.
Yeah.
I don't think even 5 years old at that point, and Gershwin was still alive at that point. And again, contradict me if I'm wrong. There was even something I remember reading where Gershwin himself was actually supposed to perform
Hmm.
the piano part of the Rhapsody in Blue in Fantasia in the when they re-recorded the next segment.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what came from Fantasia 2000 was what like were some of those planned segments
Hmm.
for what the original would have been. And if I will send you a link to this also, but somebody who's spoken in a class before, Michael Crawford, he's written a book, and also has a website, but his book is the Progress City Primer, and he talks about um, he has a chapter dedicated to kind of the making of Fantasia, and it's
Hmm.
very fascinating. And it's some of those conversations about, how will this look in the future, and how are we going to revisit this, and then ultimately why they didn't do that, and it was
Okay.
because the commercial success of the
Hmm.
project. So you see Fantasia, it gets you interested in classical music, and it gets you more interested in music in general, which then it, you have a lot of experience working in radio, which I find fascinating. Can you tell
Hmm.
us a little bit about what you did as a radio disc jockey, and I guess what a
Well,
disc
thank you.
jockey is, like what the original disc jockey was like?
Uh, Absolutely. Well, thank you, Cody. It's 53 degrees now at 54 minutes past the hour. We're going to throw the helicopter right away here with Chopper Dave. That's basically what I did. Uh, the thing about radio is, and that's how I got my start. I got started at a very underfunded, underpowered, overworked radio station in northern Manitoba, 610 CHTM. That's back in the days when it was an AM radio station. For those of you who don't know what AM is, again, do your homework. Um, the uh, the thing that I always loved about radio, and it was one of the things that the manager of the station really tried to impress on all of us, is that radio has an immediacy about it
Hmm.
that you don't get in any other form of media, or at least at that time. Nowadays, it's different. Um, the one thing we used to talk about is like news, for example, was one of the big features of a radio station, and certainly our radio station. Um, we could get a lead on a story or an announcement, say from the RCMP, the Canadian Mounted Police, uh, and we could be on the air with it in a matter of minutes, within a matter of seconds, literally. You know, we could break in the middle of a song and say, "Okay, we have this report coming in
Hmm.
from so and so," and it always made for you had to be on your toes all the time. And the thing about radio was is that it's very much a very fast-paced thing. You know, like you're literally going, okay, well now I'm going to back sell this song and then go into the next song, but in the meantime I got to talk about this public service announcement and that sort of thing. Going into what radio disc jockeys do, there are two kind of ways to look at it. There is a disc jockey, and then there were the news and sports people. A disc jockey, which is what I started out as, is literally the guy who's on there saying, and that was the latest hit from Bruce Springsteen going back to 1984 and this sort of thing. Um, and then you would also provide information, like I say, public service announcements. Don't forget to join us this Saturday for your favorite program, insert name here. And then you would have the news department, which I also did a stint in as well, um, where you were literally the guy gathering the stuff off the wire services, local news, which was a big feature at CHTM. Um, and the wonderful thing about doing local news in radio is that you have to be not only available, but you have to be at pretty much every little thing that happens in town. You have to go to the council meetings, and you have to be, if the mayor is doing an in an announcement about something, and then you have to go across town to the local shopping center had a break-in, and this sort of thing. And not always bad news stories too, because you would bring in people from the community who wanted to promote that they were raising money to support breast cancer
Hmm.
awareness and that sort of thing. So you would always have that connection, and there were people in the radio station, at least the one that I worked at, and I'm sure there are in all radio stations, whose job it was literally to be the connection between the public and the radio station, and not necessarily decide who gets on the air and that sort of thing, but to say, well, we're going to give you, we'll bring you in for an interview, or we'll put you on, we'll have you on the morning show, and we'll sit down and talk with you for 10 minutes, and you can tell me about why you're raising funds for this and this sort of thing. I did the wonderful thing, and I would tell this to anybody: if you want to get a start in radio, and believe me, it's hard to do nowadays, if you want to get a start in radio, work at a small town radio station, because you literally have to be capable of doing every single job there is in that radio station. When I was originally hired, I was hired as a copywriter, the guy who wrote commercials for the radio station. And then I started doing some voiceover work of my own commercials and that sort of thing, and that moved me up the ladder to doing on air stuff and more voiceover work and that sort of thing, which is the thing I love. And I worked in the news department, I worked in the sports department. I was the guy who scheduled commercials for a while when people were on vacation. I didn't do much at the sales end of it, going out and talking to clients and that sort of thing. But I think that's what's missing from a lot of radio and television and even on the internet, is that when you're starting out, you get this opportunity to really literally learn every single thing there is to do
Hmm.
at a radio station by doing it. Not just somebody telling you, okay, well, this morning we're going to do this and this. You actually just go and do it. And I would tell anybody, and I would recommend it highly, if you get a chance to work at a small town radio station, that's the way to go. That is
Okay.
absolutely the way to go.
Yeah. I imagine in most of those situations, you're not just doing it, you are figuring it out along the way.
Absolutely.
It's the because people are stretched so thin. It's almost the, hey, we need you to do this, and by the way, we need you to figure out how to do this. You put
Mhm.
kind of your spin on it and just make it happen, not have somebody with you all the time. um
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you a real quick story. When I was working at CHTM, um, on a Monday, several people had phoned in sick, were legitimately sick, and I was doing the morning show at that point, and I was literally on the air answering phones because I was the only person in the building. The station manager came in at his normal time, and he's asking, where's so and so, where and so and so, and I'm like, they're all phoned in sick. So he took over manning the phones. I'm doing the morning show, and then I'd run around into the newsroom, and I'd take the stuff off the wire, and then I'd jump on the air to do the news at 7 a.m. And until about 9 a.m., there was me and the station manager running
okay.
the morning show, running the radio station for 3 or 4 hours, where we were
Yeah.
literally like, he'd run in and say, okay, here's this, here's your next commercial, like, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you can only do that in small town radio.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very cool. It's just a cool, like, experience, and experience that I haven't had. So it's real interesting to hear about the. So you also mentioned kind of your real passion is voiceover.
Mhm.
And so can you, just as way of introduction, tell us what voiceover work is, and is there a distinction between voiceover work and, like, doing voices of popular characters? Are those distinct, or are they all kind of under the same umbrella, if that question makes sense?
It makes perfect sense. And unfortunately, the two kind of blend together
Okay.
in some places. Doing voiceover work, for anybody that doesn't know, is you're literally the guy in a studio, or like in my case, I have a small home studio where you sit down either with a script or a piece of copy for an advertisement or an introduction or something like that. You record the audio. In my case, I usually do 2 or 3 takes if I'm working for a client. where I'll send them 2 or 3 takes and say, okay, which one do you want? Which is the one that's closest to what you hear in your head. One of the best descriptions I ever heard of radio, and it really works in voiceover work, is that it's theater of the mind,
Okay. Yeah.
because I'm literally going to tell you this story, but the only thing I'm going to use to tell you this story is my voice.
Yeah.
So if you close your eyes, um, as a voiceover artist, I can make subtle changes in my voice to color the story and to take you different places. Earlier there, when we were kidding around about my doing the voiceover, I switched to what I call my radio DJ voice,
Hmm.
and I don't do that normally. But if you look at it, and you can find videos online on YouTube of some of the old voiceover guys, the guys doing radio back in the days, they would literally get up to the microphone and they would talk like this, and you'd hear that sort of a sound. And they got away from that obviously later on because it's kind of hokey and that sort of thing. But I can take a simple little piece of ad copy. I'm looking at a box I've got on my desk here, and it's a resistance band set. It's an all-in-one resistance band from GoZone. So there's a little pre-plug for them. So if I make a slight distinction in my voice, all-in-one resistance band set new from GoZone. Okay, that puts a little bit more emphasis on the name
Yeah.
of the brand. If I change it to say the all-in-one resistance band from GoZone is so now I'm doing it more in a narrative way where I'm saying this is something you need to pay attention to. Slight little changes like that are what a voiceover artist will do.
Okay.
And there are some brilliant voiceover artists working right now, and certainly the names that everybody recognizes, like Mel Blanc, for example. He had just this incredible talent for altering his voice, and some of it is very subtle. If you listen to early Daffy Duck cartoons, the voice character that he created for Daffy Duck was so very, very different from
Hmm.
the Daffy Duck later on in the 60s or 50s and 60s. And it was all due to the way that Mel Blanc voiced the characters. He would do the woohoo and Daffy Duck and this sort of thing. But then you would hear him doing the "you're despicable."
Yeah.
You know, it's such a subtle difference, but it really changes the color of the character, and that's what a voiceover artist does now, as
Okay.
opposed to say an announcer, which is also a type of voiceover work. Think about people like, I'm going to throw out a name that probably not a lot of people are going to remember anymore. Think about people like Ed McMahon, who
Hmm.
was Johnny Carson's sidekick for 30 odd years. His whole job was to come in, he would introduce who's coming up on tonight's show, and now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny. That was his whole gig.
Yeah.
And it sounds like nothing, but that here's Johnny is something that he came up with, and it became a catchphrase.
Yeah.
You see, one of the best examples of how you can see just how that catches on is Jack Nicholson in The Shining,
Yeah. Yeah.
as he's busting through the door there and he sticks his
Hmm.
face in one of the most terrifying moments, and here's Johnny.
Yeah.
That's what an announcer can do, and that's why it is something that I really love doing. And like I said, I'll do like 3 or 4 different versions, different reads of a line, and it just changes the whether you're selling a product or you're doing a character. And like I said, if you close your eyes as I'm doing that, hopefully I'm giving you a different picture every time
Yeah.
that you're hearing it.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And I really like that you called it theater of the mind. And when you said that, it reminded me of, remember the theatrical reproduction NPR did of Star Wars. Um,
Loved it. Loved it.
and
Had the albums, had it on tape, loved it.
things like that. And people now, there's somebody who's spoken in class also, named Benjamin Lancaster, who the first time he spoke in class, it was because he had done a student film project when he was a master's student at University of Central Florida, uh, about the further adventures of Walt's frozen head. And it was kind of the story
Mhm.
about, Walt, it was always an urban myth legend that Walt Disney was frozen. So the story
Mhm.
of this is like they couldn't freeze his whole body, they froze his head, and they like wake him up once a year to talk to him and everything about the company. But then later on, he spoke to the class because he had started a theatrical podcast,
Mhm.
called The Prototype World of Tomorrow. And so things like that, like the Star Wars, that and then also, I mean, probably the most famous examples was War of the Worlds, that
One of
actually
my
I, that spurred mass hysteria until people,
yes.
because of the way it was presented, and
Hmm.
because it was, the radio was such a major part of people's lives then, that
Yes.
it wasn't really presented as, hey, this is a theatrical representation. It was that breaking news, and you're right into the story. And so,
Hmm.
the stories of people being afraid that this was actually happening. So I what are some of your favorite or most memorable um of those, like, theatrical reproductions, or that theater of the mind, as you're talking about?
Well, obviously, I heard the War of the Worlds,
Okay.
very young age. I think I was preteen. I think it was.
Okay.
We're talking like when I was 11 or 12 years old. I had an opportunity to listen to it. I don't know if you remember. They used to have you could buy records and cassettes of old radio broadcasts,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the first ones I ever heard and that I ever owned was War of the Worlds by
Okay.
Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater. And what a lot of people don't know is how, they sit back and go, well, how could they be fooled by this? There was a little, introduction at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the broadcast where it says, "This is Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater of the Air, and tonight we present H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds." And that tells you how many times I've listened to it. um, there, people would tune in and maybe miss that opening,
Yeah.
so they came in afterwards, and there's a little bit of music playing, and then we interrupt this program for, and so on. That to me is probably one of the best descriptions or in representations of how theater of the mind works because it got into people's heads. Another one I used to listen to a lot, and I love the old comedy shows, was Abbott and Costello. And I don't know if you've ever heard with the radio broadcast where they did for the first time on radio, where they did the "Who's on First" routine.
I
That is just
So I
go
haven't
ahead.
heard the radio broadcast, but last month my two boys are in, like, a summer reading program through the library, and one of their prizes was a book about Abbott and Costello. And so they're
Oh
leafing
wow.
through, like, looking through the different books, and I said, you need to get this one. This is, like, you're going to really like this book. And so we got it. We've read it probably 20 times now, and
Hmm.
we've watched I can't remember which movie it's from, but we've watched that, and it's just hilarious. And even to the
Hmm.
point where my two boys will kind of, like, when they're just kind of off doing things on their own, you'll hear them start
Hmm.
doing that skit, like, who's on first,
Yeah.
what's on second. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I've never heard the original radio broadcast, but yeah, I'm a huge
Mhm.
fan of who's on
If you can
first.
ever track it down, I've actually got, I keep that. I've got it on my computer and I've got it on a CD and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, people think I'm nuts. Like you listen to podcasts in your car, I'll throw that on. And
Yeah.
the funny thing about it is I've heard it so many times that I can actually do both sides of the
Hmm.
conversation from start to finish. And I still throw it in and it still makes me laugh
Yeah.
because the timing is just so perfect. And that's the wonderful thing about radio, and especially like you say the old radio broadcasts. There was certainly a lot of cheesy stuff that has been forgotten over the years, but one little thing I'll point out is Superman, when he first premiered, was the very
Hmm.
first media was on the radio.
Hmm.
That was long before the cartoons, long before the television show and everything like that. And there was an announcer by the name of Bud Collyer, who was the first voice of Superman, and it was him who came up with the idea that Clark Kent and Superman have two very different voices.
Okay.
If you listen to any of the original broadcasts, he would always do Clark Kent in kind of the upper register of his voice and this sort of thing. And then he would say, "Oh dear, there's a meteor hurtling towards Metropolis. This looks like a job for Superman."
Hmm.
And again, he would do that very subtle change where he would go from this kind of falsetto sound of Clark Kent to back to his normal baritone of "This is a job for Superman." And that's where that came from.
Yeah.
And if you watch any of the cartoons, even to this day, I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
don't do it as much now because again, it's kind of hokey. But if you listen to the voiceover artists who do Superman, they tend to do Superman in this very,
Mm-hmm.
very baritone voice and this sort of thing. And then they'll make that subtle change to a more falsetto sound for Clark Kent. And even watching the original movie with Christopher Reeve, he did that too. And it fascinates me to think that all of that came from Bud Collyer back in 1939, 1940, made that subtle change in his voice
Yeah.
because that was the only way he could tell people that, okay, we're now transitioning from Clark Kent to Superman. If he had just gone with his regular voice and said, this looks like a job for Superman, it loses that emphasis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the brilliant thing about radio productions and about radio theater of the mind, is it's there, but it's all in your voice because nobody can see you. If I put my thumb over this camera right now and start talking, doing different sounds and different voices and that sort of thing, it's going to change your perception of
Yeah.
me. One of the things I find absolutely fascinating is when you hear people talking on the radio, when you see their face for the first
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
one of the very first things that pops into my mind always is, oh, that's not at all what I thought you'd look like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I remember growing up and listening to morning radio and having that exact thought when I would see them on television, like, oh, wow, that's not what I thought.
Yeah.
And so since we're on this topic and we have other things and we're gonna kind of do a little bit of shift to those other things before we move on, I want to try to give you two or three scenarios to show us that theater of the mind, if you don't mind.
Oh,
Um,
bring it on. What do you
and
got?
so for each one of these, you could do 10 to 15 seconds. You can go longer if you want, but you don't have to go very long. And they will just be kind of I will throw out a scenario of somebody doing like a mundane uh, errand or something like that, or give a situation. So the first one, let's say a Disney character, any character that you like, and this will be a voiceover, and you can do voices in it, but a voiceover for like a promotion of a movie
Okay.
about this situation. So a Disney character um, going shopping at a grocery store and then discovers that they have a flat tire, and then the rest of the you're off on the rest of the adventure and the rest of the movie to the conclusion. But let's hear that a Disney character of your choice going to a grocery store just to do random just grocery shopping and then discovering that they have a flat tire on their car.
Okay. In a world where groceries need to be bought, one mouse stands out in particular. Haha, I just want to go and get some carrots. I'm right out of them and I need them for my stir fry. Oh, shucks, look at that. My tire is flat. Yuck. Yeah, I saw that, Mickey. I don't know what to tell you. What happened there? Gosh darn it, Goofy. I guess we're going to have to walk to the store now. Well, I'll tell you what, Mickey. I have these super goobers here, and I'll pop one in, and all of a sudden, hey, what's going on? Look at me, I'm super goof.
That's awesome. Thank you. That is a show or movie that I would watch now, to see how
I've been wanting a super goof movie on Disney Plus for so long. It's long overdue.
the so the next one, and this could be it's going to be kind of a recap of a baseball game, and just various Disney characters, and that could include Disney, the Fab Five, or now the Sensational Six, any of the Disney princesses or anything, but it could also include like Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar, any character that you want to pull from, and just a recap of a baseball game between these characters, where the score ends 17-16 because somebody at the end of the game has bunted a ball. This is one of my son's favorite questions to ask. Someone has bunted a ball with the bases loaded and somehow has managed to get a grand slam because of all the errors made, and they end up winning the game. So a recap of a baseball game with characters that one side ends up winning 17-16 because they bunt a ball and end up getting a grand slam out of it.
Okay. Well, it's the bottom of the ninth right now, and there's Mickey Mouse just got off of a grand slam bunt. They're playing against the Ducks right now, so Mickey's up to bat. And a bunt out to center field to Donald Duck is going to go and see if he can get a hold of it. Oh, I better make a run for it there. Goofy, look at that. Well, look where you're going. Goofy just tripped over his shoelaces there, and it looks like they're going to have a run in. And yes, it is. The Ducks win it 17-16 on a grand slam bunt by Mickey Mouse.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. And one reason I asked for that one is because earlier when you were talking about the how prominent radio was and how the immediacy of radio, one of my favorite things to talk about when I talk in my marketing classes is just how people used to, when they would consume sport, it used to all be through newspaper, and then the radio came along, and so they could actually recreate games, and most of the games were already over, but they would recreate the games and they would do these theatrical representations of them, even using like clap sticks to like have actually wooden sticks to clap sticks to have the bunt noise and the crowd noise and all that. So thank you for that. That's awesome. The last one, let's see. The last one would be a because you talked about it earlier and you alluded to it earlier, it will be a traffic report.
Okay.
Where there is a traffic jam, and the reason there is a traffic jam is because Wolverine from Marvel was in his car and he was trying to double tap, which you shouldn't do, but clip his fingernails. And it ended up when he was trying to clip his fingernails, his claws come out, and it causes an accident in his car that causes this big backup and this big traffic jam. So
okay,
go ahead.
All right. So now we're going to throw to Chopper Dave. Chopper Dave, I hear we got an accident on the 401 today. Yeah, that's right. Today up here in the chopper, we got an accident up on the 401 today. Apparently, somebody said Wolverine was out on his motorcycle there, and he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing. It looked like he was trying to clip his nails with a Dremel tool. The nails apparently went through somebody's window and caused a 15-car pileup. We're hoping that there's no injuries in that today, but we're going to try and get Wolverine on for an interview here quickly, because we just see him running down the street yelling at people. Hey, Wolverine, what were you thinking using a Dremel tool to clip your nails in the middle of traffic? Hey, Bob, why don't you just mind your own business and let me do what I do, okay? All right, we're going to throw it back to you now, Ken, in the studio. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Chopper Dave.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ken. That was awesome. Those are awesome. And so everybody knows, those Ken had no idea what I was going to say. Full disclosure, I had very little idea what I was going to say either. So those are all spur of the moment on the spot. I think they're awesome. That was fun. Thank you.
I love doing improv. One of my dreams when I was a few years back was I wanted to be on Whose Line Is It Anyway so badly.
Yeah. I love watching Whose Line Is It Anyway. I love and I love the shows on the radio shows on NPR. Um,
Hmm.
that a few of them have come through the Memphis area that we've been fortunate enough to go and see live at like our Broadway theater downtown is called the Orpheum. I know there's an
Hmm.
Orpheum in a lot of cities, but I've been fortunate enough to see some of those broadcasts, and they're always fun, and it's so cool to see that behind the scenes, like how it all works when they're
Hmm.
doing that.
Yeah.
One thing you had mentioned early on is that seeing Fantasia got you into film scores.
Hmm.
And so I want to spend a little time on that. Um, what are some of the most influential film scores that you have heard that you like listening to? And they could be Disney, they could be non-Disney.
Well, it is Disney now. It originally wasn't, but the one that really got it, I guess I can honestly say, when I was growing up watching movies on television and in theaters, I and I don't know why, but I was always aware of the music in a movie. There would always be the opening credit sequence with whoever's score backing it up. But the one that really changed the game for me was, and I think for a lot of people my age, was Star Wars by John Williams. Um, I had just sort of gotten into classical music at that point, very, very young at that point. I was 10 years old when Star Wars hit theaters. And I just I knew this was something that I had to learn more about. I bought the original double LP set. I've had Star Wars in pretty much every media that's been available since it was released. I've had it on LP, I've had it on CD, I think I even had it on reel to reel at one point. Um, and that was the one that really sort of got it going for me. Little did I know at the time, until I started doing some research, that this man, John Williams, as far as I knew, this was the only thing he had
Mm-hmm.
composed. Little did I know at this point, he'd already been a working composer for over 30 years or
Mm-hmm.
almost 30 years at that point. So I started going into, secondhand record stores and looking for anything with the name John Williams on it just so I could hear it. And that's how I discovered a lot of his scores. And then the following year he did the score for the first Superman movie, and that was it for me. I knew this was someone that I was going to be who was going to influence my life for the rest of my life. um that opening credit sequence in Superman the movie with John Williams's score and the credits whooshing off the screen and everything like that, again, I hate to use the cliche life altering, but it really was. And that started my love of film music. And then
Okay.
I started listening to other composers, Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner through the '80s, and more than that, Henry Mancini and so on. Um, but then I started noticing one of the earliest albums I ever got, one of the earliest records I ever owned, was the Pinocchio story record,
Mm-hmm.
which opens with "When You Wish Upon a Star" by Jiminy Cricket. Cliff Edwards, if I'm not mistaken, was the voiceover artist's name. I've loved that song. Honestly, When You Wish Upon a Star is one of my favorite songs of all time, even to this day. And I've heard so many different versions of it. Other different artists have done it, but that original recording from Pinocchio is to me the ultimate recording of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to that. Honestly, I played that Pinocchio record until it was unplayable. I literally destroyed it because I listened to it so many times. And I remember there's a sequence near the end of the LP where, for those of you who've seen the movie, know there where Monstro the whale swallows Geppetto and Pinocchio and so on. And there's the scene where he's jumping through the water and comes down and crashes down towards them as he's trying to destroy the raft that they're on. And the music in the background, which if I'm struggling to remember here, but I think it was George Bruns who wrote the score for Pinocchio, is so dramatic and so terrifying. Long before anybody got into writing horror film scores or even horror films existed outside of, Frankenstein and that sort of thing. The first few times I heard that, when that scene would come on, my hair was
Mm-hmm.
standing on end. And the only thing there was music and the sound effects from the film, and then a little bit of narration by Jiminy Cricket. And I've loved film scoring my entire life. It's probably the music that I listen to more often than anything else. Even to today, newer composers, well, newer Hans Zimmer, not really
Hmm.
newer, but and some of the younger composers, and there's some brilliant stuff now, and like you mentioned, the stuff on Disney Plus, Ludwig Goranson, and I hope
Hmm.
I'm pronouncing his name correctly. The music that he wrote for Mandalorian
Yeah.
is just so wonderful, so brilliant. And what I was really impressed with is his music in The Mandalorian, and even more recently in Obi-Wan, the music that Natalie Holt wrote, or sorry, yeah, Natalie Holt wrote for Obi-Wan Kenobi. It blends into the Star Wars universe so perfectly,
Hmm.
but it doesn't sound like it's copycatting John Williams.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the thing that I think is really fascinating. And if you listen to people talk about when movie music first got started back in the 30s and 40s, composers back then, Max Steiner, Franz Waxman, and so on, they were always accused of copying off of, Beethoven and
Hmm.
Mozart and Tchaikovsky. Well, nowadays people openly admit that what got them started writing music was John Williams,
Yeah.
Jerry Goldsmith, and that sort of thing. And there's so many people I know. I have a few friends who are composers, not working professionally, but are trying to. And that's what they say, that if they had never heard John Williams, or if they had never heard James Horner or Hans Zimmer, they wouldn't have known what was possible for film scoring.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like what we were talking about with radio. The thing about music is that it's the one part of making a film where the director, unless he's writing the score himself, has to 100% rely on
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Most film directors, they go to film school and they learn how to operate a camera, and they learn how to light a scene, and they learn how to direct an actor. And even some directors are actors too. Clint Eastwood is a perfect example of that. But then they have to hand their baby over to somebody else, because 99% of people out there can't write a note of music or read a note of music. Here's my baby, please, make it better. And you hand it off to someone like John Williams or something, and you sort of have to hope that they can
Yeah.
find the emotional voice of the film in the music.
Yeah. And it is so, you just mentioned like the emotional voice. It is so important with the score. And you know, I think the Star Wars, especially the Star Wars theme and then the Imperial March, those are two
Hmm.
songs that I think just people, so many people know, regardless if you're a fan of Star Wars or not. And I think along with it's, for me, it's similar with Bernard Herrmann and the score
Yeah,
for the original Psycho. I mean, that like
absolutely.
is just so haunting.
Hmm.
I always like, that song, once you hear it, it's just it just stays with you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Ludwig Göransson. I mean, he did the score for Black Panther, and
Yes.
and and the difference is like the complete different sound for Black
Hmm.
Panther and the Mandalorian. I mean, he's just so talented. And have you seen right now on Disney Plus? They maybe 2 weeks ago when we're recording this, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they released Light and Magic. Have you watched that yet?
I haven't had a chance to. I'm dying to see it. That's
It
that's next on my list.
it's amazing. I'm trying to go through it now. It's about ILM,
Hmm.
and kind of walking through that. Where I am in the documentary now, I think I'm on episode 3, toward the end of episode 3. So they're talking about the other projects that they've worked on. But also after the first season of The Mandalorian, they did the Star Wars Galaxy. And they've done it like every season since, but there's only been one episode about the making of the series. And
Hmm.
Marvel does that with like Marvel Assembled today on August 3rd when we're recording. The making of Miss Marvel has actually just dropped on Disney Plus, at least in the United States.
Hmm.
Um, so they do these, and they're fascinating kind of behind the scenes. But the first season of Mandalorian, they actually had either 6 or 8 episodes of that gallery series, and one episode is completely dedicated to the score. And so
Yeah,
you actually see Ludwig Goranson and creating the score and what he used, the instruments he used to create that. And
mhm,
that was one of the most interesting episodes of that for me, because
I
I'm a
agree.
big music fan, but I am
Mhm,
not musically inclined in the
mhm,
least.
yeah.
I would not be able to do that. I can't carry a tune beyond, my boys wanting me to sing to them. Once they realize, I think they start listening to a lot of other people sing, they probably won't want me to sing anymore. Beyond that, like, I'm not musically inclined, but it's just
Right.
so interesting,
Yeah.
that the emotional attachment that you can get from songs and you get from
Mhm.
these scores. Is there one, if you had to identify two or three songs, not full film scores, but two or three songs that have stuck with you throughout your life, what would they be?
2 or 3, well, that's because there's a lot, but 2 or 3,
Well, you
I'm
can go
glad
you
you
can go past two or three
w
if you
well, I'm glad you mentioned, Bernard Herrmann, and I wish I had mentioned him first. Bernard Herrmann, for me, is probably the best film composer that ever lived, and I'll say that's my opinion, so nobody, don't email Cody, don't email me. Um, and you mentioned the score to Psycho, and the wonderful thing about the score to Psycho is that it was born actually out of a necessity. A lot of people don't know that Alfred Hitchcock funded Psycho
Yeah.
entirely out of his own pocket
Mhm.
because the studio wouldn't touch it. So he wanted to make this movie, and he funded everything out of the pocket. And when it came time to write the score, he had a very limited amount of money left. And Bernard Herrmann actually did the score for no fee. All he had was the money to pay the musicians.
Mhm.
And he had a very small budget. So the entire score for Psycho is written for strings. There's nothing else in the score. There's no woodwinds, no horns, no percussion. And so that took a certain level of genius to create all of the emotion that's in that movie, and certainly the murder theme, as it is
Mhm.
actually called, is the one that everybody remembers.
Mhm.
But there's so much of that score that is just brilliant. The opening sequence with the credits by Saul Bass is just this driving
Yeah.
theme, this da 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 dun 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 da da dun
That's
da da
actually
dun dun
that's
dun
actually
dun.
the one that's more haunting to me
I agree. That's the one
than
I was.
anything
That's one of the
else.
ones I
Yeah.
was going to use. I know everybody immediately goes for the murder theme, but it just conveys this sense of urgency right from the minute.
Yeah.
Like it opens with two chords, and again, I'm not a good enough musician or a good enough knowledge, have enough knowledge of music to tell you what the chords are. But it starts with dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Well, you know you're in for something right
Yeah.
from that. And if you ever want to do a master class on writing film scores, then I cannot recommend the score to Vertigo enough.
Mhm.
Again, by Bernard Herrmann, again by Alfred Hitchcock. The score for Vertigo is probably Bernard Herrmann's greatest score. And again, it all sticks with you every time you hear it. As I'm saying it, I'm hearing in the love theme in the back of my head. And if you ever get an opportunity, I know it's available on Spotify and I know it's available on YouTube and that sort of thing. Sit down, listen to it. Whether you watch it in the film or whether you listen to it separately, you won't be disappointed. It is one of those most haunting scores. It just sticks with you. Everybody talks about the emotion and the psychology behind Vertigo. 90% of it, or well, at least 50% of the emotion and the psychology of that film is in Bernard Herrmann's
Yeah.
score.
Yeah.
And I have heard people do analysis of it online and in on radio, as a matter of fact. A BBC program I listened to a couple of years back, where they did a whole thing on the music of cinema, I believe is what it was called,
Hmm.
and they devoted an entire episode to Bernard Herrmann, and just the level of quality that he brought to film scoring is amazing. Like, and I'm not surprised that he is still considered one of the greatest
Hmm.
composers of the 20th century. The other one for me, and I alluded to it a little bit at the beginning, was John Williams's theme for Superman.
Hmm.
That opening sequence, I saw it in the theater, and this was back in big old movie theater days when there was, like, I think the theater I saw it at, the Metropolitan Theater here in Winnipeg, was one of those old classic 30s movie houses with like over 1,000 seats in it. It was a
Hmm.
huge theater, and because I went on opening day, the theater was packed, and I ended up sitting in the balcony, 2 or 3 rows back from the railings, which actually turned out to be a really good seat. And this big screen with these credits whooshing towards you and the music and everything like that. And I no disrespect to anybody who's composed scores for a superhero film since. Nobody since John Williams wrote the Superman theme has gotten it so perfectly.
Hmm.
The the heroism of the music, the optimism of the character, and the music literally says the name.
Yeah.
Like, if you watch the scene where the word Superman actually comes on the screen, the music says Superman. Like, it actually says
Yeah.
the word. And there's a story that Richard Donner told in the commentary of the DVD, where he says he wrecked John Williams's first take because he came running into the studio after. He said, he's like, genius, genius, that's brilliant, how did you do that? I wish I knew how you did that. And John Williams, apparently a very humble man, just sort of looked at him and said, well, this is what I do, this is how I do it. And that's what he said about, like he said, originally, a lot of people may not know, originally Richard Donner wanted Jerry Goldsmith to
Mm.
write the score for Superman because he had worked on The Omen with Jerry Goldsmith, and Jerry Goldsmith won the Oscar for The Omen. And at that point in time, both Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams were working back to back. Like, literally, they'd go from one film into the next.
Yeah.
And because of the scheduling problems they were having on Superman, they lost Jerry Goldsmith. So they said, well, who's next? Well, John Williams is available. This
Yeah.
was right after Star Wars. And actually, a funny thing about it was they said, well, we lost John Williams. So they got back Jerry Goldsmith.
Yeah.
And then again, because the budget, the shoot ran long, they lost Jerry Goldsmith for the second time, and they got back John Williams again. And I can't imagine, and I'm a huge fan of Jerry Goldsmith, and I'm sure anything he would have written would probably have worked every bit as well. But I just cannot imagine Superman, even to this day, the new versions with Henry Cavill and so on. I still hear the Superman theme. I
Yeah.
still hear
Yeah.
that. And if I had to pick out a desert island list of my top 10 or top 5 or even top 2 CDs, I would have to have the soundtrack to Superman the movie would be on that list,
Okay.
bar none.
Okay. And I have I have a playlist of John Williams songs,
Mm-hmm.
some of his themes, and like for me it's yeah, the Superman one is great, but we talked about Star Wars and Jurassic
Mm-hmm.
Park, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the like that are just so iconic that when you hear them, and it's just that theater of the mind, like you
Yep.
mentioned earlier, where you
Yeah.
just picture. I hear the Jurassic Park theme, I picture dinosaurs everywhere. I hear the Star Wars theme,
Mm-hmm.
I picture the huge star destroyers that you would always see at the
Yeah.
beginning of the movies. So another score, and it's really songs that mean a lot to me are from the Muppets. The
Oh,
theme, Rainbow Connection, everything that um and I'm not very aware of who composed that, the songwriters for them.
Paul
I
Williams and Kenny Asher.
Okay. And so
Sorry, I that's me showing off my nerd side there. So
no, that's um the, those songs are even in the more recent ones. We just a few weeks ago watched the Muppets. I think it was 2011 when it was re-released. It was with Amy Adams and Jason Segel. And the song in that, am I man or Muppet? Am I a man or am I a Muppet? Like all of the songs that they have, they're just so great from the show to the movies. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. What are do you have a favorite song or two or top three that have come from the Muppets franchise? And like I said, that could be the show, the movies, anything.
Absolutely. From the show, I think the first thing that comes into my mind as far as from the show would be Phenomena.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
do 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 do. Um, in fact, I actually used that in an interview, or rather in an intro for one of the episodes of the solo show. Um, as far as the movies go, they have a history of having some of the best composers and songwriters that were working at the time. And like I said, I threw out my nerd street cred there with Paul Williams and Kenny Asher that wrote the music and the songs for the Muppet movie. Joe Raposo wrote the songs in the movie for several of the other films as well. And I can honestly tell you that every one of the original movies has at least two or three songs that I
Hmm.
absolutely love. In the first film, well, of course, the Muppet movie, of course, is the Rainbow Connection. I mean, that is just such a brilliant song. Regardless, like that's a good song, whether it's in a
Hmm.
movie or a Broadway show or a Muppet or anything like that. That's a good song. The one told actually for me that not a lot of people talk about is is I'm going to go back there someday.
Hmm.
Uh, that's sung by Gonzo when they're out in the desert. And I mean, you want to talk about just a brilliantly poignant, touching song. Listen to the lyrics about that sometime. It's just this beautiful song about, I don't want to say regret, but it is kind of about
Hmm.
regret, but it's also about thinking about the things that you want to do in the future. There's a line in the song that is there's not a word yet for old friends who've just met.
Hmm.
Like that's poetry. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. And it touches me every time I think about that. And it's about making connections like that. In The Great Muppet Caper, there's a song where they're singing about living at the Happiness Hotel. It's just this catchy, feel good number, you know. It's just such a wonderful thing. And then there's the scene where they're riding the bicycles through the park, Hyde Park, I believe it is in London, where they're singing "Shouldn't We Ride." That's another beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful song.
Yeah.
The one it's kind of funny that the one song from the Muppets Take Manhattan that I really like is one of the ones that wasn't supposedly featured in the Broadway musical of the film was I'm trying to think of the name of it now, but it's "Look at Me, Here I Am, Right Where I Belong." You know,
Hmm.
um, I can't think of the name of it right now. I'm drawing a blank for some reason, but I would have to say that my absolute favorite, and I don't know whether it was written for the TV series or if it actually was written for Sesame Street, but it's Kermit the Frog singing "It's Not Easy Being Green."
Yeah.
Like that to me is one of my absolute favorite songs of all time because it's not just about a Muppet. It's not just about, I mean, it's the idea of it's the idea of learning to love yourself
Yeah.
no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, it's not easy being green, but you know, maybe it's okay. Green will do just fine. You know,
And
yeah, that's one of my absolute favorite songs.
I think what is so interesting about the Muppets and about like animation and animated movies and projects that are animated musicals, one thing that's so interesting is those are some of the more touching songs to me. Those are
Hmm.
some of the most meaningful and touching songs. I mean, if we're talking about like even like recently, to me, I really like the soundtrack of Encanto,
Hmm.
and the soundtrack to that. But it's so interesting that people go in to watch like an animated movie or show or things, and you walk away with this feeling of, well, that wow, that was a lot more touching than I thought it was going to be. And it's from it's from the music. I mean, it's not Disney, but about, I don't know, 5-6 months ago now, Vivo came out, written by Lin-Manuel Miranda on
Hmm.
Netflix, and that's an amazing musical. That and Encanto, I mean, could be legitimate Broadway shows. I mean, there are scenes in both of those that look like they actually are Broadway productions. But
Hmm.
I always find it interesting with animated musicals and with the Muppets that you just like, it sneaks up on you, you know,
Hmm.
like you, even the latest Muppet Babies, the latest iteration, which I think started in 2018, and that's what my boys watch most. We have an album of that on my phone that we listen to all the time, and they're songs about like having bad days or using your imagination and all of these. And just that's what I appreciate so much about those songs and about all these scores, is that um they just sneak up on you, as
Hmm.
I've said.
Uh,
um
I think it's very easy for people to be very dismissive of animation as being kid stuff.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people miss that some of the really great, like you're saying, songs and scores have come from animated films. Like I alluded to earlier, uh, "When You Wish Upon a Star" is
yeah,
just a beautiful song. It doesn't matter that it was written for Pinocchio. It's just a beautiful song. If anybody else had written it and recorded it, I mean, if Ella Fitzgerald had recorded it in the 50s, we'd say that was one of the great
yeah,
songs of the American songbook. And Disney in particular, I don't know whether Walt Disney had just a real talent for finding brilliant composers and lyricists, or whether it was just providence. But think about the history of people that have written songs for
hmm,
Disney projects. The Sherman Brothers.
yeah,
The score for Mary Poppins is a personal favorite of
yes,
mine, and not to make a pun of it, but there's not a bad note in Mary Poppins.
yeah,
Every song stands out. Stay Awake is one of my favorite songs of all time. And you want to talk about a beautiful lullaby for children.
hmm,
Um, I mean, and then of course you get into like the fun song, Supercalifragilist and whatever. And that tradition seems to have stayed as part of it. And you can even say, Jim Henson had the same
yeah,
knack for finding composers and lyricists that could say things in a way that he maybe wasn't capable of saying.
yeah,
That opening scene of the Rainbow Connection at the beginning of the Muppet movie, well, that tells you everything you know right
yeah,
from the first frame of the film.
yeah. And you know, I love the like you Mary Poppins is quite possibly my favorite Disney
I would
musical
have no
movie.
problem with that. Yeah.
And I love Mary Poppins Returns. I love the
Hmm.
music of that.
Yep.
We listen to that music, and we sing that music a lot from both of those movies.
Yep.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, but also Cover Is Not the Book, and it's all these things that
Hmm.
they have deeper meanings, also. But and you mentioned like the Sherman Brothers and then Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, and their work
Yep.
during the Disney
Yep.
Renaissance. And
Yep.
I mean, it's fascinating. I feel like there's another conversation between you, myself, and a few other people where we just talk about w- Disney musicals. Greg Heilman and I
Pick
talked
it.
about Disney musicals one time, but I mean, we could have many, many, many more
Yeah.
conversations about
Pick
all
a
of
day. I'll be there.
that. So I
Pick a
did
day.
want
I'll
to
be there.
say, is there before we talk about the solo show and GCT and we finish up with the MCU, and I know we're running out of time, so we have to get through this all quick. But um, do you have a favorite Disney musical that could be Broadway movie musical? And then do you have a favorite musical overall? It could be Disney, it doesn't have to be Disney.
Okay. My favorite Disney musical. I'm sorry, I have to split it between two because there's just no way I can pick one or the other. I'll do it quickly. It would be Mary Poppins, just as I said, just so perfect. The other one for me, and I'm glad you mentioned them, is Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Um, Alan Menken went through a period in the late '90s there where he won like 5 Academy Awards back to
Hmm.
back, and honestly deserved every single one of them. At the end of Beauty and the Beast, in the finale sequence when they're dancing in the ballroom, he cuts to the choir singing the song Beauty and the Beast. And the first time I heard it, I was listening to it on my Walkman on a CD, and I had it on my Walkman and on headphones. And the sound quality just filled my head with
Yeah.
this choir singing, and I'm actually getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It's just such a beautiful song, and that beautiful moment, and it's this part of the score that he wrote and part of the song, and that to me is like that's just again a master class of film scoring.
Yeah.
My favorite musical of all time, though, I have to say, is Rodgers and Hammerstein, The King and I,
Okay. All right.
and the movie as well. When I was growing up in high school, I actually did play the King of Siam in our high school production
Okay.
of The King and I. Loved every minute of it. Shaved my head for it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
That's how I got the part because I showed up for the auditions, my head shaved. Um, and and I had been a fan of the movie prior to that. Like I've seen it on stage a couple of times with different actors in the role. I would have loved to have seen Yul Brynner play the part at one point. But for me, that's Rogers and Hammerstein's best work. I think the music in that film is just, or I mean, that score is just outstanding.
Okay.
Um, and a lot of, like I'm a fan of Broadway musicals in particular. I mean, I even maybe not as much recently in the last few years, but growing up, I listened to a lot of Rodgers and Hart and Rodgers and Hammerstein, the Gershwins, and so on. And just even there's one going back to my love of Superman. I don't know if anybody has ever heard the score to the film or the Broadway musical. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman,
Mm-mm.
which hit the Broadway stage in 1966. And it's literally exactly what you think it is. It's a Broadway musical about Superman.
Yeah.
And I just sort of thank God for libraries back when I was growing up because I got to rent a lot of records and cassettes and CDs from libraries, and I've heard things that I probably never would have had another opportunity to hear. So I tell people, you know what, experiment, listen to
Yeah.
stuff that you might not normally listen to because you never know where you're going to find the next gem.
Yeah. Yeah. That, and I'm glad you, I'm glad you talked about all of that. I think for me, I think I'm not sure if it's my favorite, but I'll say it's got to be up there now is the Music Man. I love the Music Man.
Love it.
I
Love it.
like there are very few songs in that musical that I just I can't sing or I won't sing. I listen
Hmm.
to a lot of musicals when I'm outside working in the yard or mowing or things like that. I actually
Hmm.
listen to that or podcast usually. And
Hmm.
one kind of trivia point about you mentioned Beauty and the Beast, which was just such an amazing movie, and like like the meaning behind it, and what Howard Ashman said about like he envisioned the beast being that was someone living with, or that was what it was like. Or I guess it should say other people interpreted it that he was trying to portray that being what it was like to live with HIV at that time,
Hmm.
like the people being afraid and feeling alone and things. But the final scene in that, or the ballroom scene, I believe, is the first full Disney scene that was CGI created, except for the dancing characters. At the end
Hmm.
of Little Mermaid, the very final scene, the with the ship and the sunset and everything, that was computer generated. But then I think the first full kind of scene in a Disney animated movie from Pixar was that ballroom scene in Beauty and the Beast. I
Hmm.
believe, and I can't remember if it's the one at the end or if it's the one where they're singing the song Beauty and the Beast. But so there are two more things to get to, and I hope you don't mind. We're out of time. If you are willing to talk a little bit more.
Nope, keep going.
So I do want to talk about you on the solo show and the Grand Circle Tour podcast, and how you got into that, and it seemingly have like this. I mentioned before we started recording, it's like you're just expanding your podcasting prowess. So can you tell us a little bit about those projects?
Well, when Stan came to me about the GCT podcast originally, he I think I said this earlier. I had done some voice work in radio a few years back, and I was talking about a shtick that I had heard on a radio station, not one that I did, but somebody else had done, and it was a character called the Champ, and it was this character who was a punch drunk boxer who used to have these bizarre adventures. And we got talking about how much the thing used to make us laugh, and I did my impression of the Champ, and he asked me if I could do something for him for the GCT podcast for a little skit. I'm like, sure, yeah, I'll be happy to do it. So we kind of hammered out a script, and I went home and I recorded it and sent it to him, and he loved it. And I had done a little bit of voiceover work for the Grand Circle Tour podcast, available wherever you download podcasts right now. And I had done some voiceover work, an intro and an outro and that sort of thing, and some little other things, a couple of contests they had. And I figured that was all it was ever going to be. He'd ask me to do the thing once in a while, the odd time. And then he started talking about doing his own podcast. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good idea, because, you have a great deal of knowledge about this. Like, if you ever want to talk about Disney destinations, I highly recommend you sit down and talk with Stan Solo. This guy, he knows his stuff. Like, that's all there is to it. I figure one day I'll make my trip to one of the Disney destinations, and I'm going to take Stan along as a tour guide. That's all there is to it, Anyway, he got talking about what he wanted to do on his own show, and he asked me if I'd be, willing to do an intro and a thing like that. And I said, well, I've got kind of an idea. Something I used to do on my radio show was kind of like a late night with David Letterman sort of a shtick, where we were doing that sort of, there was a little joke and it was always going to be something Disney related. And now please welcome your host, a man who's the only guy who's ever proposed to Daisy Duck, sort of a joke about, introducing Stan Solo. And he's got me started doing that sort of thing. And that was, again, going to be, and I do the production end of it. I do his editing and I do his sound and that sort of thing. He does all the heavy work. He does all the heavy lifting. And then I come in and just sort of polish it up, as it were. And he asked me one day, he was going to do a trip report, and he wanted to do it in 2 parts. And he said, what we'll do is we'll do the sequence before they go on the trip, what they're doing to get ready and everything like that. And then the sequence after they come back from the trip, and was it everything you expected and everything like that? Oh, okay, that's a really good idea. He said, but I want to do a break in between them. I want to do a commercial in between them. And I said, well, we got a sponsor. He says, no, I want to do like a funny ad. And I said, well, okay, you know what? I've actually got a really good idea for one. And it was something I had done something similar on my radio broadcast, where I did a funny ad for the James Brown car alarm. And it was basically somebody breaks into the guy's car, and all you hear is, hey, hey, hey. And I said, what if we do like the Donald Duck car alarm? And it was the same sort of thing. You hear the sound of breaking glass, and then you hear Donald Duck, sort of a thing, And he said, that's perfect. So I put it together. And at that point, he was doing a lot more. This was pre-pandemic, doing a lot more trip reports with people. And so it became our thing, is that we would come up with a different ad all the time. And they were Disney related. They were Star Wars related, things like that. We did one for when the Mandalorian hit and Baby Yoda took off. We did the Baby Yoda pierogi maker. We did the Imperial chamois to polish the window, made of 100% bantha fiber. We did Gus and Jacques glass shoe repair, this sort of thing. Just any kind of silly thing we could come up with, a 30-second or a 60-second ad. For one of my personal favorites, and I'm sort of plugging myself, is actually one I came up with. We did most recently was the Figrin Dan and the Total Nodes greatest hits, with the Star Wars song and the Leia song and that sort of thing. It's on It's on one of the episodes more recently, and it's just a chance to really stretch our imaginations and have a little fun and be a little bit creative and sort of make fun of, the old style KTEL commercials where
Yeah.
you can get the record or cassette 9.99, 8-track tape 7.99.
Yeah.
We've done a few products like that. Actually, one person asked me one time, uh, after they had heard the commercial for edible mouse ears. Somebody asked me, are those real?
Yeah.
Like, can you actually get edible mouse ears? And I did a little look online, and apparently there are edible mouse ears that you can buy. So I'm thinking, okay, now Stan and I, we want to cut.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we
It's
should have a cut.
free. It's free promotion for that product.
Exactly.
And for anybody who's interested in hearing more, on this, if you listen on this podcast, if you listen to class number 71, I talked to Stan, Beatrice, and Dan from the Grand Circle Tour podcast. And then I talked to Stan about the solo show on class number 27. So he was
Mhm.
one of the early ones, but it's just it's so interesting that you're, like I said, like it seems like your prowess is just expanding, and now you've been on the shows, you're guest hosting the shows, and
Mhm.
actually it was listening to those commercials on the solo show that gave me the idea to kind of have you go through those scenarios earlier,
Mhm.
because they're so fun. And then I also wanted to like be cognizant of, well, I don't know if, I'm sure he plans those out and he actually writes those. He doesn't just do it on with 5 seconds notice. Um, but it's so cool to know that story, and to know kind of that experience of being on those podcasts. Um, the the last main topic that I have is, we talked about you being a fan of the Marvel comics and of the
Mhm.
MCU. And so, one thing that we'll start with is, before we were recording, you were talking about the MCU and its current form, and
Mhm.
you are a longtime fan of the comics, of Marvel comics, and then
Mhm.
getting into the MCU, you've been a fan. Um, but you were sharing with me some of your thoughts about the MCU right now, where they finished up the Infinity Saga in 2019.
Mhm.
Now we know, because of San Diego Comic-Con, we are officially in the multiverse saga,
Yeah.
and Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is finishing up phase 4. I actually just read yesterday that the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special is an epilogue to phase 4. So in between phase 4 and 5, and then Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania will start phase 5. Um, but tell us a little bit about your interest, your fandom of the MCU, and then what you kind of your views of the MCU now and moving
I
forward.
I started out as a Marvel fan. I mean, I'm a fan of both Marvel and DC, as I've
Hmm.
alluded to Superman many, many times. Um, but I was always a fan of maybe the lesser known characters
Hmm.
of the Marvel universe. My personal favorite character for a long time growing up was Doctor Strange,
Okay.
as opposed to, I mean, I love Spider-Man, I love and I love the Incredible Hulk as well, and that sort of thing. But I like some of the lesser known characters. I was a fan of Hawkeye before, back in the days in the comics when he was with the Defenders and that sort of thing. Um, so when they started announcing that they were going to be doing the Marvel movies, I really hoped that they would eventually get to some of these lesser characters, which they've
Hmm.
done. When I saw the first Iron Man in the theater, that's 2008, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. Uh, I have to say I was blown away. I mean, it was just wonderful, just brilliant. And I thought, okay, well, this is sort of a one-off. This is great. Another really good superhero movie, because prior to that, there hadn't been a lot of really
Hmm.
good superhero movies. You could count them on one hand. And having been a fan of comics for a long time, wanting to see them in film form and sort of in a grown-up fashion. I think a lot of people tend to think of superhero movies and media as the Batman 1966 with Adam West and
Yeah.
and that's unfortunate. I think, and at the time, I didn't realize that there was a plan that this was going to become part of an expanding universe. And I still to this day say I don't think they did either. I think
Yeah.
that if Iron Man had failed at the box office, I think it would have been a one-off. I don't think you would have seen Iron Man 2 and Ant-Man and so on and so on. But I think I don't want to say they've hit their peak because I don't think that's fair because I think as they bring in new blood into the universe and new writers and new directors, they're going to keep finding new stories to tell. I'm going to say something that's probably going to get us both some hate mail. I think the last few things that they've been doing haven't been as good as in the films. The television product that they're producing is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I loved WandaVision. Honestly, WandaVision to me is better than some of the movies they did. Um, I loved Loki. I loved more recently What If. What If
Mm-hmm.
is just genius. It's something I enjoyed thoroughly. And I think what they maybe need to start doing is maybe focusing on that for a while. You mentioned earlier the Ms. Marvel. I mean, it's not directed towards me. I'm definitely not their target demographic on Ms. Marvel, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. I
Yeah.
thought it was a lot of fun and so on. The movies themselves, I recently saw Thor Love and Thunder in the theater. I enjoyed it very much, but I do have to say, and again, please don't burn down my house. It seemed a little bit forced, you know? It seemed like, okay, it's almost like this is our obligation to get this next movie out here, that next sequel. And I did think that I'm not sure that the multiverse storyline is going as well as say the Infinity Saga did. The Infinity Saga was brilliantly interconnected. All of the storylines sort of you needed to know this to know
Mm-hmm.
this to know this, and everything led to the next scene. Literally, right from the first time we saw Thanos come in and say, "Okay, I'll do it myself."
Yeah.
You know, we knew that we were seeing something that was going to be really good. The multiverse saga, and it's something actually that Stan mentioned, and when we did a review of it on the solo show, we did a review of Multiverse of Madness. And one of the things that he said about it, and it sort of resonated with me, was that there's no real consequences
Yeah.
to the
I
multiverse.
remember here. Yeah. Listening to that one.
And he made a very valid point, and I really hadn't thought about it until he said that, because what's happening to, they killed off spoiler alert here, everybody. Maybe if you haven't seen any of these movies yet, this is time to pause. They killed off the Doctor Stranges in other universes, and we're only supposed to care about the one that's in our
Yeah.
universe. Well, what about those other universes? They've lost all their heroes. They've lost all their Doctor Stranges and Mr. Fantastic and so on and so on. And it makes it very easy to write these storylines that say, well, we're going to kill Doctor Strange. We're going to kill everybody basically because there's no real consequences in our universe. Our Doctor Strange is still alive. Our Mr. Fantastic is still alive. And I'm a little bit worried that they're going to use that as a cop out, as a way to do these very dramatic things. With the comparison between the two, between the Infinity Saga, is when Thanos snapped his finger and wiped out 50% of the universe's population. It had a very real impact
Yeah.
on our universe, and we lost major characters because of it. And you don't know how they're going to correct that
Yeah.
until you see Endgame. And you don't know if they're going to be able to correct that. And are they going to be able to bring back every single character that they wiped out? So there is definite drama there. There is definite danger there because you don't know, is everything going to work out? When you're talking about these characters in the multiverse and there's all the different iterations of these characters, there's no consequences.
Yeah.
So it loses some of the drama behind that. And I have to admit that's kind of where I'm at with my mindset with that right now. So I'm hoping that we're going to spend some time focusing on not just the multiverse, but on what the effects are in our universe
Yeah.
on these films.
Well, and I feel like, because now we know the phases, and I think, to be fair, like looking back when the MCU started, it was just such a new thing. No one knew what it was. And like I listened to the MCU fan show, another podcast for Sean Gerber, who's spoken in the class a couple times. And he made a point that, when the MCU started, we didn't really know what phase one was until until
Hmm.
they said, this is phase one and here's the Avengers and it's over. And it was like, oh,
Right.
okay, that's great. Oh, wait, there's going to be a phase two. There's going to be a phase three. And so now,
Hmm.
like, there is that expectation of, is this phase four? Is this phase five? Is this phase five? Is this phase six? What saga are we in? Because, through the first three phases were a saga. The next three phases apparently are going to be a standalone saga. And then we'll move on to, 8, 9, 10, or the 7, 8, 9, and keep going. I two things. I wonder if, because I remember talking about this after the Infinity Saga ended. At what point will Marvel start to suffer the same kind of consequences, or the same like outcomes, as Star Wars? Where Star
Hmm.
Wars, because there was so much time between the three trilogies, you have large segments of fans that you're either a fan of the original trilogy, you're a fan of the prequels, or you're a fan of the sequels. We're depending largely on what age you were when you were first watched those movies and you were introduced to those movies. Like, I'm an
Hmm.
original trilogy fan, but I've liked
Hmm.
all the other ones. I didn't
Yes.
care for episode 8 because that one kind of stands out to me, but I'm a fan of all, like, the prequels and the Disney sequels. Um, but I have colleagues that I work with that they have younger kids, or their kids, the prequels were actually their favorite movies because that's the first ones
Hmm.
that they watched.
Right.
And so I do wonder if Marvel is experiencing that somewhat. Like, now that we have this one saga done, is it going? Will it develop into will it develop into a fandom split where some fans are fans of the Infinity Saga and that was the best
Hmm.
thing, and some fans are fans of the multiverse saga, and then whatever comes next, whatever comes next, and then also, how realistically, how long do they keep this going? And you would say they keep going until as long as they keep telling good stories. Um,
Yes.
and I also do think with this saga, we met He Who Remains in Loki, and then it has
Hmm.
been revealed that Kang the Conqueror is kind of the next big threat. That's not a
Right.
spoiler for anybody. Is the next big threat in this multiverse saga. So I wonder if phase 4 was kind of all the consequences from the Infinity Saga. Like, it's telling about
Hmm.
all of these consequences, and sort of all of these stories about like personal responsibility and things like that. And then in phase 5, when Kang the Conqueror is in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, if it starts to bring it more together, because there is a line that I don't want to spoil for anybody, but there is a specific line in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania that was revealed at San Diego Comic-Con. I wasn't in the room, but I've read about it. That would allude to, maybe it's going to start making things are going to start being tied closer together from phase
Hmm.
4 moving
Hmm.
forward, and it's going to be like after the fact, that we learn all of these things. And I also I think you're spot on with the television series, the Disney Plus series. I mean, there are some of these that Miss Marvel needed to be a long story form.
Yes.
WandaVision was a great series because it was the long
Yes.
storytelling. I
Yeah.
loved Moon Knight, and actually
Yes.
talked to two people in episode I think 89, talked to Rick Grieve about the representation of dissociative identity disorder in Moon Knight, and how it was
Hmm.
pretty accurate with obviously
Yes.
some creative licenses. And then in class 90, I talked to Dr. Josh Robertson about Robertson, sorry, about the representation of the Egyptian mythos in it, and
Hmm.
it was pretty accurate with some creative license. But I think they are doing a really good job with these shows. I'm really excited to see what happens. Um, and but I do wonder if we are experiencing kind of a rift among the fandom, where are we going to start identifying as well, I was a fan of the Infinity Saga, I was a fan of this
Hmm.
saga, that things like that. And I know I've spoken really long and haven't really asked a question, but that's, I was going off of what you said. So um
Well, I think the question in there is, you think you talk about the fact, like, I'm old enough to remember seeing Star Wars in the theater. Um, and I'm sorry, I say Star Wars because that's what I saw. I
yeah.
didn't see A New Hope. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm one of these guys. Get off my lawn, you darn kids. Um, but
Well, A New Hope wasn't
at that
added to the title until Empire
right
Strikes
until
Back, right?
1981.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. We didn't know when in 77 when George Lucas released Star Wars that there was going to be a
Yeah.
second film, let alone a trilogy.
They
Um,
they really did not know.
no, they didn't.
And
Even
I don't I don't
I
want to
still say
I don't want to spoil anything, but when you watch Light and Magic, you're gonna see just how
oh yeah.
crazy all of that stuff was. It was amazing.
Well, George Lucas now says that he had always planned it to
Yeah.
be a trilogy. I don't know that I necessarily think that that's 100% true, or maybe he's just not remembering it properly. I mean, it is 50 years ago almost now. Um, good Lord. um, and the funny thing about that is that when he announced that there was going to be a sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, the fan base went bananas. I mean, we lost our mind. And I mean, this is when the fan base was basically people writing letters back and forth. We were,
Yeah.
members of the Star Wars fan club and that sort of thing. So there was no internet to play off of, and no real easy way for me to get in touch with, hey, listen, Cody, I know you're down in Tennessee or whatever, but did you hear this thing from
Yeah.
George Lucas about, so and so? And it's so much easier now for them to say that this trilogy is going to lead into this storyline and this storyline. And like you mentioned with the Star Wars trilogy, like, I agree. I'm an original trilogy fan. I never thought I'd be thinking of it as an original
Yeah.
trilogy. To me, it is the trilogy.
Yeah.
Um, and but I also think that when the prequels hit, I think they got a bad rap. I think
Yeah.
they got more hate than they actually deserved. And there was a division between the fan base at that point in time that I think was probably unnecessary. I think a lot of people said, "Oh, well, there's Jar Jar." Well, okay, you know what? There's lots of things like that in movies. Not every movie is perfect. Um, and especially now when there was such a long break between the end of the prequels and then into Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And at that point, there had not been any other real media outside of some video games and that sort of thing, because there were no TV series, there was no streaming series. A lot of what was generated was fan based, and we were trying to tell the stories that we thought were interesting. Just a perfect example of that is that somebody sat down and came up with the idea for Rogue One.
Yeah.
Well, what
Yeah.
happened before? What happened in between the moment that Princess
Yeah.
Leia gets handed the plans? How did they get that?
Which is an
And
amazing story.
yes,
That
exactly.
is one of the best movies, I think. It's amazing the way they
I
integrated everything.
I absolutely agree. And what I love about it is that I think there are, and it's certainly within the Marvel universe and the DC extended universe and the Star Wars universe and even the Star Trek universe, forgive me, um, is that there are so many other stories that can be told
Yeah.
from other perspectives. Like I know it's Star Trek, and I know that it's that's almost blasphemous on a Disney show, but I would love to see, like I've often said, and if I was a producer or I was a better writer, I'd love to see a story that takes place on Vulcan,
Hmm.
talking about the Vulcan experience,
Yeah.
just for an example. And we're doing it now with the Star Wars
Yeah.
universe. I mean, now I'm so lucky. I thoroughly enjoyed Obi-Wan Kenobi, and
Yeah.
I want to touch on, because you made a mention of talking about in Moon Knight the thing with the dissociative disorder. Obi-Wan Kenobi for me is one of the first times I think I've ever seen a really almost 100% accurate portrayal of a person dealing with PTSD.
Yes. Yeah.
When you see Obi-Wan, and I made a comment about this on one of the podcasts that I was on. When you see Obi-Wan in that very first shot, this is full credit to Ewan McGregor. This is a broken human
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
And the transition from the time you see him at the beginning to where he's at the end, I mean, he's still not cured, he's still not okay, but he's getting there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really loved about Obi-Wan Kenobi the series is how they dealt with that.
Yeah.
There's moments where you see him literally sitting talking to himself saying, okay, this has to end. How do I get through today? You know? And there are so many of those stories that I think could be touched on. And we're doing so much of it now. Like I'm so looking forward to Ahsoka next year. I'm
Hmm.
waiting desperately for the second season of The Bad Batch. I'm so looking forward now to Andor coming up in about a month or so. And all of these stories, I mean, when you talk about Star Wars, it's a universe
Yeah.
with thousands and thousands of different people and characters and interesting stories that can be told. Like they're talking about with Andor now, we're going to start learning more of Mon Mothma's
Yeah.
backstory. That's wonderful to me. Her character was kind of a throwaway in Return of the Jedi, and I was so happy to see her come back in the last couple of
Yeah.
movies. And I think that we have the opportunity to tell all of these stories. And I hope, my fervent hope is that Marvel is, and not only Marvel but Disney, is listening to the fans saying, this is what the stories that we want to hear.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily just grab the comic books and say, okay, well, now we're going to tell the Venom saga, and now we're
Hmm.
going to tell the Secret Wars saga, and now we're going to tell, the Crisis on Infinite Earths saga using DC. Tell us some of the stories about some of the other
Yeah.
characters. And I think that's maybe where Disney is missing the mark. They want to go for the big blockbusters, like I
Yeah.
say, the Secret Wars that they've announced. Again, I'm not telling any spoilers here. They've announced that Secret Wars is coming down the road and that sort of thing. And that's great because I think they'll make amazing movies. But there are other stories in there
Yeah.
too. Who wouldn't want to see a story about Harry Osborn
Yeah.
before he became the Green Goblin? How did he end up becoming? I mean,
Yeah.
leading up to that point. I mean, maybe that's a bad example, but there are so many stories out there.
Well, they do. They, from WandaVision, and I want to bring up WandaVision here and after this also.
Hmm.
But from WandaVision, we have Agatha. She is getting her own series. That
Hmm.
I think that was fan driven, or at least like people weren't writing in about it, I don't think, but just seeing how popular this character was, that it's like, okay, well, we're going to tell more about this. And, it started out Agatha House of Harkness. Now it's Coven of Chaos.
Hmm.
So I do think they are telling some of those stories. I like, and I like what you said about just, if you tell the stories that fans enjoy, and that doesn't mean it always has to be the ones fans ask for. It sometimes is, um, for example, I didn't know I was going to enjoy Hawkeye as much as I did, because
Absolutely.
he was not one of my favorite characters. He wasn't really featured heavily in a lot of the movies. And then, just kind of everything that was going on with, um, outside of the movies with the actor playing him and everything. It just kind of like, I wasn't sure if I was really going to like it as much. But actually before that show came on, I heard it was based off the Matt Fraction run. And so I went and I read the Matt Fraction run on Marvel Unlimited, and I ended up loving that show. I mean, it's a great, it was the biggest surprise to me that of one that I have thoroughly enjoyed. About WandaVision. What do you WandaVision and Obi-Wan Kenobi? What told the more compelling story of not necessarily PTSD, but dealing with loss and trauma? Of those two, which one do you think told the more compelling story? Because it was very, Obi-Wan goes one direction, Wanda Maximoff obviously goes a completely different direction during that show.
It's kind of hard to compare the two, um, but I think they both tell in their own way really compelling stories. I think that because both of those characters are so broken when we see them at that point in each of the stories, they I don't think they even realize themselves how broken they are. When you see Wanda at the beginning of WandaVision, it's almost like she's skipping through life, and here's this 50s sitcom, and then here's this 60s sitcom, and she doesn't even really realize how broken she is. And you don't actually see her coming to terms with how broken she is until we actually get to, and again, no spoilers here, um, till we get to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of
Yeah.
Madness. You could almost have taken Doctor Strange out of that storyline entirely, and it
Yeah.
could have been about Wanda. And in
Yeah.
fact, it really, truthfully, is. The other side of that is with Obi-Wan, because he didn't know that Anakin was still alive,
Yeah.
or at least that's what they tell us in the story. I don't think he's really dealing with the death of well, he's dealing with the death of Anakin and the guilt he feels about it, but maybe not in quite the same way that Wanda is dealing with the death of Vision and basically
Yeah.
her whole world, her whole life. Um, until you see, and I don't remember whether it's the second episode where third sister tells him, Reva tells him
Yeah.
that Anakin is still alive, and you see that reaction on Ewan McGregor's face. And again, I can't say enough good things about Ewan McGregor's portrayal of Obi-Wan Kenobi in that series. Um, just this mix of emotions that he's going through. So they tell both very compelling stories, but also very different stories. And as somebody who has known people with PTSD and dealt with a certain amount of it myself, um, it's a disorder that is very different for every single individual
Mm-hmm.
dealing with it. There are certain things that are kind of connected to everybody, whether it's, whatever your triggers are and that sort of thing. But everybody's story and everybody's way of dealing with it is very different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the wonderful thing about those two stories with Wanda and with Obi-Wan, is that their stories are completely different, but yet the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately they both end up in different places
Yeah.
at the end of the story. You sort of can say at the end of Obi-Wan, when Liam Neeson shows up as Qui-Gon, well, it took you long enough to get here.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about him reconnecting with the Force. He's
Yeah.
talking about him coming through that dark period.
Yep. Yeah.
And then at the end of WandaVision, you see her, clipping flowers in the fields there, and then we cut to the shot of the Scarlet Witch. That's her reality. What she's doing there, the clipping flowers and everything like that, that's the fantasy that she's
Yeah.
maintaining. And that's very much the case in with people with PTSD, is that they put on what you call a brave face, where
Mm-hmm.
they're I'm functioning, I live my life, you wouldn't know I'm dealing with this stuff, but then I go home and I cry myself to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know and that's very, very true of people dealing with PTSD.
Yeah.
And I know we've kind of gotten off topic here a little bit, but I mean, it is something that I think it's a disorder that I don't think honestly, I don't think we pay enough attention to it, because I think a lot of people tend to think of PTSD as just being something that people deal with who have gone through major trauma,
Yeah.
like soldiers
Yeah.
coming home from battle, or people who have, survived, like we talked about the 9/11 experience there earlier in the podcast. That's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah.
There are different people who deal with PTSD for different reasons.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that we're putting a spotlight on that.
Yeah. Well, and that the last thing on that is just the importance of showing that, and showing that differences experiences are different.
Mhm.
It's not the same for everybody. And so I think that is very, very important, that they do that. And I think that's one thing that media, storytelling, and especially fantasy storytelling, can do
Mhm.
such a good job of, because it is, and they are in fantastical worlds. We, as much as we want to believe we do not live in the Marvel universe, or we do not live in the Star
No.
Wars universe. So the stories
Yeah.
from those universes are fantastical, and but they have some very real storylines with them that I think maybe some people that possibly are resistant to some of those lessons, or talking about those things, they at least can be exposed to it, because of these
Mhm.
fantastical worlds. I enjoy it. Thank you for sharing that. That To kind of wrap up, some rapid questions. I like asking
Sure.
people rapid questions, and these are things that you can explain. You don't have to explain anything about them at all. It's up to you. But so in the class, the first one I'll ask is, in the class, the students do identify a Marvel character, and they talk about what character or characters they identify with, why they identify with them, and essentially kind of what are some of the attributes that those characters embody, that they see or want to have moving forward. Is there what character, Marvel character or characters, do you most closely identify with?
I would say there's probably two that I would identify with most of all, and that would be probably Captain America and Tony Stark.
Okay.
Specifically Tony Stark, not Iron Man, specifically Tony Stark.
Okay.
Just a quick explanation. I think Captain America is sort of a character that wants to be the guy that you can rely on.
Yeah.
He wants to be that character. Like he makes there's a line in one of the movies where where he's talking to Tony Stark, where he says, "You're not the guy to lie on the grenade, to
Yeah.
take the hit for the team." Whereas we see in the first Avenger, he is actually the guy who literally
Yeah.
threw himself on top of the grenade. As far as Tony Stark goes, I'd like to think. I mean, I don't. I don't pretend that I am. I'd like to think that I'm kind of the go-to guy who maybe has the solution that nobody else can come up with. At least that's sort of my goal. My personal goal is to be that guy who has the answer to the question.
Okay. All right. Um, do you have a favorite Disney movie? That could be Disney, that could be acquired properties, anything. A favorite movie?
Uh, Disney movie specifically is Fantasia.
Okay.
It is always has been my very favorite of the Disney movies. As far as acquired properties go, it has to be Star Wars.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was actually my next question, is favorite Disney acquisition, like as a whole, not specific movies or anything.
Mhm.
But the acquired properties, Lucasfilm, specifically Star Wars, is your favorite.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sort of hoping that someday, I mean, it'll probably never happen because it's owned by Paramount, but I'm sort of hoping some days they'll be able to acquire the Lucasfilm Indiana
Oh,
Jones characters as well.
I know. I would love I would love to have the Indiana Jones movies on um Disney Plus. I often joke with
Hmm.
people that I consider myself Indiana Jones, because
Hmm.
I'm a professor,
Hmm.
and okay, our backyard backs up to a nature preserve, and occasionally
Oh.
we'll get animals and snakes and things up in our yard.
Mhm.
I am not a fan of snakes, so
Nope.
I consider myself Indiana Jones on a smaller scale.
Okay.
The last one, um, since you have so much experience in radio, and you're a radio person, um, do you have a favorite radio themed movie or show? So this would be a show or a movie that is about radio. So I'm thinking like American Graffiti, or um, what is I can't remember the first four call numbers, but Cincinnati.
WKRP.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
something like that where radio plays such a prominent role in the project.
Mm-hmm. As far as radio themed, it would definitely be WKRP in Cincinnati.
Okay.
Um, a lot of the character that Howard Hessman played as Dr. Johnny Fever, I can honestly say that he influenced kind of the way I approached my morning show
Okay.
when I was doing it, sort of the chaos,
Yeah.
where you're just kind of holding on to everything by the skin of your teeth. There's one shot in the series when we first meet Dr. Fever before WKRP switches to the rock and roll format, and he's just back selling a song from whatever, it doesn't really matter, and he's trying to load a what's called a cart, which is nothing more complicated than a tape that you play commercials on.
Yeah.
And he's trying to load it into the to the machine, and he actually has to turn off the microphone for a second and just bash it to get it to go into the machine, because it will not go in, because they've got this antiquated equipment in the station. And he turns his microphone back on and finishes up like that. I actually had to do that at my radio station once or twice, where the equipment will fail you. So you'd literally turn off your mic for a second, bang the thing, turning the mic back on, and we'll be right back after this.
And no one's none the wiser.
And no one's, well, that's the whole point of radio, theater of the mind. Everybody seems to think like, when I throw to a record, I threw one morning, I was working on a Saturday morning, and I had the record, and this is when we still played records at this radio station. I had it on the wrong speed.
Yeah.
I literally had Bruce Springsteen playing Born in the USA. It was coming up, Born in the USA. So I sort of stopped it, set it back on, and I said, okay, for those of you with a hangover, that's going to sound just about perfect. But and that's the thing. Like, that's the thing I love about radio is, like I say, the immediacy of it. You can't always cover up your mistakes.
Yeah.
So that's the best thing about it. So WKRP would definitely be my absolute favorite of the radio themed TV shows and movies.
All right. I think this has been so much fun. Thank you for talking. Thank you for talking for a lot longer than I had originally scheduled you for. But as I said before we started recording, I start these conversations and 1,000 more avenues open up. And so thank you for letting me pursue a few of those. There's so much more that we could talk about, but for people who want to hear more of your work or contact you, how could they do that?
Anybody that wants to hear my work, the best thing to do is to visit the Solo Show YouTube page. And while you're there, please take a minute to subscribe. Please take a moment to click the like button if you enjoy what you hear on the Solo Show YouTube page. We're also on Facebook as well. You can visit the Solo Show Facebook page if you want to listen to any of our podcasts and other content there as well. For the Grand Circle Tour podcast, we also have a YouTube page and a Facebook page for those as well. And wherever basically you listen to podcasts, if you download them on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're going to download podcasts, that's where you're going to hear the Solo Show and the Grand Circle Tour podcast.
Okay.
If you want to contact me specifically about maybe doing a commercial for your podcast or doing intros or voiceover work, anything like that, you can contact me at my email is tvfella, TVFELLA 67 at gmail.com, and send me an email. Let me know what it is you need to do, and we can talk about whatever project that I can be of assistance with you on.
All right. Well, Ken, thank you so much for this. This was an amazing conversation. And as I said, there's so many more conversations we can have, and maybe in the future we'll bring a few people back to have roundtable conversations about a few things. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun, Cody. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.